What is up, you guys, and welcome back to another episode. I'm so thankful that you are here with me. Today is part 2 to my 2-part series of manifesting. So if you missed the last episode, you can definitely go back and check that out. That's episode 5 called Practical Manifesting. And in this episode, I talk about how manifesting really is twofold. It's both calling in the life you want, which is what most manifesting practices will focus on, right? Affirmations, that kind of stuff. But then also, it's removing subconscious blocks that prevent you from thinking that you can have whatever it is you're pursuing. I talk about stress and creativity and the way that stress kind of blocks you from manifesting your authentic life. I talk about incoherence, what incoherence is, and then I get into kind of the good stuff. I give you 5 tools that you can add to your toolbox when it comes to manifesting. I talk about gratitude, affirmations, surrounding yourself with good materials, power of writing, and then, of course, having faith to know that the universe has your back and it is all for the better. So again, I'm so excited that you guys are here with me. I hope that you enjoy this episode. Welcome to the Get Out of Your Head podcast, where we talk all about the stories that keep you stuck, blocked from manifesting what you really want, and away from your authentic life. I am your host, Sarah, from Spirit, Mind, Body. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Thank you for being here with me for another episode. So this is a 2-part series to manifesting. So last time I talked all about how manifesting is a little bit more practical than we have kind of been led to believe. It can be magical, it is magical, but also there's this grounded aspect to manifesting. And really, if you're not engaging in some kind of manifestation practice, it's really just an untapped potential within you that you should harness and you should hopefully start practicing yourself. Last time I talked a little bit about quantum reality, kind of how this magical aspect plays out, but really it's just about changing your focus and getting yourself in the right headspace to make things happen, to call in the life you want. And then I also ended on this note that manifesting sort of has 2 parts. It's calling in the life we want and then removing the subconscious blocks that prevent us from getting it. So if you haven't listened to that episode, you can go back, you can listen to it if you'd like, but I hope that you have buy-in. I hope that if you don't have some kind of manifestation process, maybe you're starting, or maybe you can use some of these things and some of these tools that I'm about to talk about today to integrate into your own manifestation practice if you don't already know about them. And sometimes I think we get lost in the language. So if the word manifesting doesn't really work for you, then you can use a different word. You can call it planning, dreaming, imagining, visualizing, mental sharpening, focusing, aligning, getting yourself into the right headspace, setting your intentions, whatever you want to call it. It really just is this process of figuring out what you want and aligning yourself in the right way to get it. So like I said last time, we sort of ended on this note of manifesting has 2 parts. The first part is all about calling in the life that you want, and then the second part is removing the subconscious blocks that prevent you from getting it. So today, what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually talk about removing subconscious blocks first, and then I'm going to talk about 5 things that you can do that can kind of help get you in the right headspace to call in the life that you want, to raise your vibe, or whatever you want to call it. And I think that sometimes a lot of manifestation work will talk about raising your vibe and doing the first, that calling in the life that you want, but we kind of ignore this subconscious blocks. And it almost starts to become sort of like this fear tactic if we believe that anything that lowers our vibe is going to then subsequently call in things that we don't want. And so we start to almost shy away from addressing these harder things. And it almost leads to this spiritual bypassing where you only focus on the good things that make you feel good and you sort of just ignore anything else. But the thing is that it's not the truth. Life is full of polarities. It's full of ups and downs and in-betweens. And so we have to address these subconscious things or these things, the shadow aspects that we would rather not look at. Just because you're sitting with a friend that needs you and you're going there in a hard time with them, that doesn't mean that you're lowering your vibe. I think that it would be a lot lower of a vibe to ignore that friend and to pretend that they don't have problems or to pretend that you don't have problems, to ignore the hardships. And so it really is just about addressing these things head on so that we can really be honest about it. And we get these subconscious limitations because we kind of live in a world that's governed by rules and absolutes. I just did a post about this today. Is like we all grew up in a world that had this is an A and this is an F. And this is how you behave. This is how to believe. And sometimes we actually internalize these things and we think that there's a right way to feel or there's a right way to do everything. And we have to recognize that just because somebody else did it one way doesn't really mean that we have to do it. We have to grow up at some point and recognize that we are the authors of our own story. We can write our own scripts. And at some point, we have to realize that the rules that somebody else made or set forth or the standards that somebody else put out there isn't necessarily the standard that we need to subscribe to. It comes to recognizing that we're sovereign beings and that we can make our own decisions. We are our own ultimate authority. And so I think that half of removing subconscious blocks, or probably even more than half of removing subconscious blocks, are really just questioning, why am I doing what I'm doing? Not everything needs intense healing. And I would say that sometimes, yes, there are traumas, there are things that we have gone through that definitely need large amounts of caring and attention. But most of the time, what it really boils down to is just asking ourselves, why am I doing it this way? Do I have to do it this way? Is this causing me more stress? And could I do it a different way? So this happened to me just recently. If you don't know, I am a new mom. So I have a 3-month-old and an almost 2-year-old, and I've had to start making content that is actually a little bit ahead of schedule. So when you read my things, usually they're about 2 weeks or older. When you listen to a podcast, it's usually about 2 weeks old. I recorded it 2 weeks ago, and I don't really like doing this, to be honest, because I need to be in tap, and I really like talking about things as they're pouring through me. I feel like that's the best way. But in order to be consistent, I've just kind of had to do this, and I've just kind of had to get ahead of the game a little bit. But what I was telling myself, here's a story I was telling myself, is that when I go on stories, I was telling myself that I had to talk about what I was posting about at the time. So that doesn't feel good to me though, but I just sort of assumed that that is how it needed to be because that's how I did it in the past and that's how other people do it. And I just assumed that. And the funny thing is that doesn't always happen, but it's just the way that I had perceived it. And so when I just questioned that, do I have to do it that way? Do I have to talk about what I'm posting about when I'm on stories, which is pretty much real time? And the answer is no. There's no rules that I have to follow. And so that was an example of a time that didn't need intense healing. It just needed me to question it. And so most of the time we just need to ask the questions. We just need to say, like, does this work for me? And could I do it another way? Or am I just assuming that this is what I have to do because somebody else did it this way? And here's another thing that I think is kind of hard when we're talking about addressing limiting beliefs or the subconscious ceilings that we put on ourselves. We don't really know what's there because they're subconscious. This is what I would say is that we need to start looking at what stresses us out. And here's the thing, is that stress is anti-creativity. When I say stress, I really mean this discomfort within you. And I kind of talked about this on my first episode. If you wanted to go back, you can listen to that. But the way that it goes is that we have ego stories. We have stories that we tell ourselves over and over and over again. And these stories come out of our subconscious. When we were little, we were programmed. When we were ages 0 to 6, we got this program from somebody else, and it was in the way that we observed the norms, what people did, what things we saw on TVs, how to interact. We kind of got this program when we were kids, and that program then becomes the majority of your subconscious. And that program runs all the time because it's really energetically inexpensive to run. And when you are stressed, your body sends out hormones that tell you to only do what is beneficial to your survival at that point, right? And so it would make sense that you would run a thought process that was energetically inexpensive to run instead of running your conscious thought process, which is really expensive to run. And so if you want more on that, you could go back and listen to the first episode, like I said. But basically what I need to say though here about stress is that we need to reimagine it. And most of us, I think, have this idea of stress of like a very particular image, right? You're probably super busy at work, you have mounting pressures, the kids are crying, you have little sleep, we have this idea of stress, but really there's so much more to that. I think that if you umbrella this stress term, reimagining it as more than just stress, it's any level of discomfort. So let me give you some examples. It's resistance, it's boredom, it's your pants being too tight, it's feeling tired when you need to be awake, it's internal conflict, it's incoherence, which I'm going to talk about in a second, it's being angry with somebody or feeling fear or overwhelmed, or if you're feeling bloated or sick, that can trigger stress. If you're stuck in a story, if things aren't going your way, spilled milk, all of those things can trigger stress. And we need to recognize that when we're stuck in those states, all of those things are preventing us from tapping into our creativity and being our authentic selves. So anytime you're feeling stressed, that's what they say is low vibe. And so you need to address that stress, or you can redirect your attention. Sometimes that works, or you need to question it or heal something that needs to be healed. That will get you out of a stress state and into your creativity and into, a space where you can manifest from your authentic self. So I wanted to talk about incoherence because I think that it's something that's often overlooked. And so if you think about it this way, incoherence is just basically conflicting energies within you. So I did an IGTV on this, and it was all about setting your intentions. What does that mean? And then coherent energy signatures. So if you can imagine, an incoherent energy signature is one that sends out energies at different vibrational frequencies. And so what happens is that in some places, the energies start to cancel each other out, and then some places they start to amplify each other. And really what this means is that it's incoherent, right? You're not sending a clear message. It's more jumbled. It doesn't make sense. And I think that the number one contributor to incoherence is lying to yourself, being dishonest with yourself. And so I kind of talked about this in my body image episode, but what is going to lead to more incoherence and more of a stress state is telling yourself that you should be a different way that you are. Any kind of resistance to what is going to lead to an incoherent energy signature, and then that also leads to stress. So for example, if you tell yourself, I just need to love my body the way it is, and I actually don't, well, then that's incoherence, and that's ultimately low vibe. If I think that I need to be a different way than I actually am, then that is what will lead me to incoherence. If you're not addressing your shadow issues, if you're not addressing these darker parts of yourselves, then that's going to lead to some place where you're stressed, and then manifesting the life that you want is going to become very difficult for you because you're sending out two different energy signatures. It's a conflicting belief, and it doesn't make sense. And so it doesn't manifest in the way that you want it to, right? It doesn't become reality in the way that you want it to. And so I say all this because I think a lot of manifestation guides, whether it's a podcast or a book or whoever you follow, make you believe that we have to be high vibe all the time, and that any negative vibration would invite in bad things or things that you don't want. And I just think that that's such a fear-based tactic. And it definitely, like I said, leads us to this bypassing sort of state where we lie to ourselves and about how we truly feel and what we truly need. And then we just end up in denial and in stress. And this denial or this lying to ourselves is such a subtle state of stress that we almost can't detect it. And because it's so subtle and because we can't detect it very easily, it kind of goes under the radar and it just becomes this background. And over time, it sort of accumulates to a point where it does so much damage and we don't even realize it. And so I think that the single most helpful thing that you can do to try to start realizing where you're stressed, where you're incoherent, is just check your energy. Just get in the habit of every time you go somewhere, every time you do something new, just check your energy. Check in with yourself. Does this feel good? Does this feel bad? Does this feel resistance? Do I feel, where do I feel tightness in my chest? For me, it feels like this sinking feeling in my chest or in my knots in my stomach when something's off. And then I know that I need to address it. But you don't know what you need to address if you're not aware that there's a problem. Okay, so to be honest, you guys, I will probably do another episode on what your energy is like, how to detect that, and how to listen to your body and what your body is telling you, and then where to go from there. So I wanted to talk about the first part of this manifestation process that I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, this calling in the life you want, and things that you can do that would help you to do this. This is probably the good part. This is the high vibe, the woo-woo stuff that we all kind of gravitate towards, not the darker parts. So I have 5 things for you. This is not a catch-all list. Take what works for you, leave the rest. There are so many other practices, you guys, and I could go on, but I just wanted to leave you with 5 things that maybe you could do on a day-to-day basis that will help you start to get into the mindset of manifesting the type of life you want. So the 5 things that I have for you are gratitude, language and affirmations, surround yourself with positive things, write it out, and then of course have faith. So if I had to choose one of these practices, gratitude is it. Always start in gratitude. Gratitude opens your heart, instantly raises your vibration. It's pure, it's honest, and to be honest, there's so much to be grateful for. We overlook gratitude all the time, and I think that it's just such a shame. I mean, and to be honest, we're biological creatures, so we're geared to look for the negatives because that's what's going to help our survival, but we forget about all the things that there are to be grateful for. So if you're not sure where to start with the air in your lungs. Let me take you through some of the things that I am consistently grateful for, and maybe you can introduce some of these things into your own practice. I am consistently grateful for healthy children. I am so thankful to be a woman in the 21st century. 150 years ago, you guys, I couldn't vote. Women didn't have a voice. And now I have my very own podcast and I get to share my ideas with you. And I get to perpetuate my ideas and then be able to connect with like-minded people. On that note, I'm so grateful for technology. This is like a creative endeavor that I never could have pursued 50 years ago. I'm so grateful that I have people in my life that love me and that I have people in my life to love. And I know that sounds maybe overly simplistic, but there are people who die alone and who have nobody. I am so grateful consistently for climate control. I think that we take that for granted, but what would it be like to be exposed to the elements all the time? For roofs over our heads. I mean, you have to really think about these things. I'm grateful for clean water and the clean water that is so easily accessible anywhere that I am. I am so grateful for the financial ability to buy and eat healthy food. I'm so grateful that I can watch a sunrise while drinking hot coffee. I mean, seriously, you guys, what a luxury. Like, think about what it would be like 200 years ago. Something as simple as a cup of coffee is just, we take it for granted, you know? I am so grateful for my exercise routine and the fact that I can connect with like a YouTube person for free every single day and it costs me almost nothing. I am so grateful that we live in a society that literally has so much abundance that we've had to come up with moderating tactics so that we don't overconsume, like diet or minimalism. Those are just things that I honestly think about, I'm consistently grateful for, but I arrive at those things by asking myself, well, what would it be like to go without? And then imagining and really getting into, like, what would it be like to not have healthy children? What would it be like to not be able to see a beautiful sunrise? What would it be like to have to walk miles for clean water? And this is like a reality for so many people, and we just take it for granted every day. And I think that sometimes we might think that imagining what it would be like to go without would almost be like egoic, like we're considering that we're better than somebody else, and that's not it at all. It comes from this place of connection. We actually connect to somebody else. We actually, in that moment that we imagine what it would be like to be without, it actually anchors us in these really amazing emotions like compassion for somebody who doesn't have shoes. It gets us out of our box. It's actually more egoic to take what you have for granted and to not consider those people and just keep taking and taking and consuming without realizing or without giving thanks for what you actually have. Okay, that is like my gratitude spiel. I could go on, but practically speaking, I used to start with a gratitude journal at the beginning of the day before I had coffee. And to be honest, it was kind of hard for me because I would just end up writing things that were meaningless. It didn't strike a chord in my heart at all. It would be like, I'm grateful for my coffee and for my pencil and for this notebook, the end, and then I wouldn't think about it for the rest of the day. And so I have found that it is much more easy for me to practice gratitude almost like throughout the day or on a moment to moment basis. So when I'm feeling overwhelmed or I'm feeling stressed out, I use the phrase a lot, at least it's not this. At least it's not as bad as this. At least it could be worse, and I always consider that it could be worse as a way to bring perspective to my life. And then in that moment, then I search for something that I'm grateful for. When I go to sleep every night, I just run down the things that I'm grateful for that had happened that day. And that helps me, actually, that calms me down. It centers me. It brings me so much peace. I start my day thinking of what I'm grateful for. And then throughout the day, it's just a noticing. And if you want to, you can record this in a notebook. But for me, I just kind of do it in my head. Okay, that's what I have on gratitude. That was kind of long. But the second thing I have for, of course, I couldn't talk about manifesting without talking about language and affirmations. And here's where some people might disagree with me. Language does and doesn't matter. It does matter in the way that it evokes feelings, but it doesn't matter in the way that the feelings are what matters more. Does that make sense? What you feel about something matters way more than what you say about something. And so a lot of people think that affirmations need to be said in present tense, but to be honest, I don't. And it feels like I'm lying if I'm saying something that isn't true. So for example, if I say I am a millionaire, that feels a lot like lying to me. And that brings me back to incoherence. And I don't think that's helpful, and it doesn't propel me towards anything. If I say something like I will be a millionaire one day, if I'm convicted about that, then that works for me. And there are some very specific things that I have found in my life that I am absolutely convicted on. I knew I was going to have a home birth. I knew I was going to marry my husband. I knew that my fitness was going to be restored after I gave birth. I know eventually I'm going to leave my job and I'm going to do what I'm doing now, sharing this kind of stuff with you, being a life coach. I'm going to do that full time. These are things that I'm absolutely convicted on, and they're not things that like I need to happen. I just know they're going to happen. So in that way, it's not desperate. There's no underlying feeling of desperation. Well, what if I don't? Like, there's none of that. I just know it's going to happen, and I'm absolutely convicted on it. And I'm not attached to the thing either. If it doesn't happen, I know that there's something better for me. And so it doesn't feel bad for me to say something like, I'm going to have a home birth, because I knew that was going to happen. Does that make sense? And so I think it's whatever works for you. If saying it in the future tense turns you off and you're more in line with how to say it in a present tense, there's a book that you can pick up on Audible. I would and wouldn't recommend it. It's called The Law of Attraction by Michael Lozier. But he has a lot of really good practical tips and he has a lot of good points. The person reading it might be kind of hard to get over, so I would recommend listening to a sample before you invest. But anyway, in this book, he talks about how you can use the phrases more and more. I'm in the process of, I love getting excited thinking about blank. So you would say something like, my finances are getting more and more healthy, or I'm in the process of pursuing my ideal career, or I love getting excited thinking about attracting my soulmate. All of these things you can use to kind of bring your affirmation into the present tense without, lying about it. But again, like I said, it's just a tool. Language and affirmations are just tools to make you feel a certain way. What you feel, what you believe is more important than what you say. And if you're saying something that doesn't align with your core underlying beliefs, then you're probably going to be putting out an incoherent energy signature, which leads to stress, and stress is anti-creativity, and on your manifestation will not work. Also, I think that you should be aware of the language that you use, right? And this is almost like, our internal state is reflected by the language that we use. So if you want to be in the most amazing marriage, but all you have to say about your marriage is negative things, then that reflects what you believe inside. Sometimes we don't even, like I said, we don't even know that we're lying to ourselves. And I almost hesitate to use that word lying too, because it almost sounds like it's intentional, and it's not intentional. We're trying to talk ourselves into one thing, and we just have this subconscious underlying belief that hasn't been addressed. So we can use language to figure out what our subconscious beliefs are if you're paying attention. In the same way, if you're like, I know I should love my job, it has great benefits, pays good money, I like my coworkers, but then on the flip side, you're constantly complaining about it, then you can ask yourself, well, what do I really feel about my job? And let's just be honest about it, because then when you're honest about it, of course, then you can address it and then you can change it. Okay, the third thing that I have for you is surround yourself with positive things. I don't know if you've heard about this before, but it's called the 5 chimps theory. And it says something like, we are most like the 5 people we spend our time around the most. So whoever I surround myself with, I'm probably going to become like them. And it's the same thing with the books you read, what goes on in your social media, what comes across your TV, the conversations you have. Everything that we expose ourselves to has a subconscious effect. When we surround ourselves with positive things, of course, we become more positive people. We become more like the people that we want to be like. And when we surround ourselves with negative things, of course, that's where we're going to go. And this is a big reason why I don't watch the news, is because I just see it as not informative, but more fear-mongering than anything. I would highly caution you, set boundaries around your social media. And like I said in the beginning, get more and more in tune with checking your energy. Check your energy before you go on Instagram. Check in with yourself while you're scrolling. Before I started this work, I would spend hours on Facebook and get off and feel horrible about myself because, of course, I was comparing myself to somebody else. I felt just inadequate and just like I was worthless, and I felt sinking and like I wasn't doing enough. And it comes with discretion and it comes with checking into your energy. But I've gotten to the point where I can recognize these things in an instant now, where I'm like looking at Instagram or I'm looking at Facebook or I'm trying to get inspired by something or by something that somebody's doing. And immediately, if it makes me feel awful, I just stop. I just get off, because that's not helpful. It starts to become to a point where it's not helpful. And I think that it boils down, and I'm going to talk about this in a second, it boils down to having faith, right? If I'm comparing myself to somebody else, I'm not honoring my own path. And when I don't honor my own path, I'm not honoring what the universe has in store for me. If I choose to compare myself to somebody else, I'm turning away from myself and I'm turning away from what the universe has planned for me. And in that way, things like this podcast don't happen. Things like my Instagram account doesn't happen. And so I think about these things all the time. What if the people that I benefit from constantly look to somebody else? What if Gary Vee or Tim Ferriss or these people that I just adore, Tony Robbins, decided to follow somebody else's path? Then I wouldn't have benefited from them at all. And so it comes down to honoring our own path and honoring the way that the universe is choosing to work through us. And in that way, I can be the full expression of me without being inhibited by somebody else. That was just a word of caution. Okay. Getting back to this, that was like a tangent, but make a plan, make mood boards, get inspiration, start dreaming. Research all the ways that you want to align yourself with your goals. When you're bored, daydream about what you want to achieve or attract or create. I would highly recommend every morning just spend 5 minutes imagining what you want your day to look like. Think about that and then let it go. Don't become attached to like this has to happen the way that I had planned it out. But at least when you're imagining the way you want your day to go, you are in control. You're in the driver's seat. You're taking the reins and you're making that happen for yourself instead of waiting for things to happen to you. Does that make sense? So it's being proactive and it's aligning yourself with those positive influences, getting yourself in the right headspace, but then also recognizing when those influences can become almost too much of a good thing or they can start to detract from your own path. Okay, the fourth thing that I have for you is write it out. When you write, you become one step closer to making this into a reality. I like to think of ideas or feelings as almost energy. They're almost like this rain cloud that starts to swirl around us. And so it could be like excited type of energy, or it could be a nervous energy, or it could be, low vibe, anxious energy. And what happens when we have this energy that we don't allow to pass through us, it just builds and builds and builds like a rain cloud. And so it like kind of hovers over us. And what happens when we write it out is we allow it to rain. We allow it to pour through us and then release it. And so I would highly recommend, if you are feeling any sort of self-doubt, just write out all of your beliefs, all of the subconscious things that you could possibly think of. And you might feel silly by doing this at first, but it's not for anybody else but for you. And all you do is you just release it. Writing it out allows it to materialize and then let it go. And if it's negative, I typically burn that sheet of paper or tear it up or do something that like symbolizes you releasing that energy. And I really do feel way better when I do this kind of stuff. But even more practical than that, if it's ideas, my notes app is the most used app on my phone. I write down everything. I write down ideas, things that I have to do. I write to resolve internal conflict. I write what I'm grateful for. I write out my worries. I write out my affirmations. Writing has such power in it and it's untapped potential if you're not making use of it. Okay, the fifth one is, of course, to have faith. Know that this is all for the better. You are a part of the connected whole. You are not separate from it. What is good for you is good for everyone. When you fill up your cup, when you are full and happy, you can pour into other people's cups. The universe has your back. The universe wants you to be happy. The universe wants you to feel fulfilled. So every day I ask the universe, I ask the connected whole, you can call it God if you want, but I ask, what do you want from me? What do you want me to give? And then I pray that lessons can be learned easily. And then I surrender, I let go. I have an idea of what I want to accomplish and what I want to achieve and what I want to build. But sometimes the universe has a different plan. And that's the thing too, is that I have lived by this phrase and it has served me well, this or something better. I think all of us have a story of a time where maybe it was like, a relationship where at the time we thought, oh no, my life is over. This relationship is ending. I'm heartbroken. I don't know where to go from here. I feel so lost. And our egos in that moment convince us that we have to get this person back. We're grasping. We're like, this is it. But hindsight, you're in such a better place without that person and you've grown through it. We all have a story like that. You might have gotten blocked by the universe in one aspect where you were trying to go, and then it ended up being way better than anything you could have imagined. And that happens to me over and over and over again. And so when I feel like I'm being blocked, when I feel like things aren't working out for me, I just remember that like there's something greater in store. There's something so much better that is coming through, but I just have to be open to it. Okay, so those are the things that I have for you guys today. Remember that manifesting is equally about addressing your dark parts as it is embracing your light, and align with your light. But then when you have to address those dark parts, we have to go there, and it is what it is. And I think that avoiding pain is probably worse than the pain itself. So I'll just leave you with that. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I will see you next time. If you enjoyed this episode, I would invite you to subscribe, share it with someone you know, and leave an honest rating or review. You can also connect with me through Instagram at spiritmind.body, through YouTube, or my website. Links to all of these can be found in the show notes below. This work is not easy and requires tremendous self-reflection, grit, and a willingness to be misunderstood, and for that, I honor every single one of you for showing up for your authentic self. Until next time.